Episode 153. J Warner Wallace reacts to TikTok atheists. Because we all know they are the worst. For those who might not know, J Warner Wallace makes a big thing of his credentials as a cold case detective. And he makes a big thing out of using his cold case methodologies for validating the existence of his God. We are still unbelievable, along with many other atheists, are not impressed by his reasoning. Here, we will respond to his responses to atheists so that we can explain why he does not impress. As usual, the link to the original episode being responded to is link 1 in the show notes. You can find more of J Warner's content at Cold Case Christianity. Enjoy.
Veteran cold case homicide detective investigates the truth of the Christian worldview.
This is how the episode opens. Investigates the truth of. From the beginning, he's making it clear that he's not investigating the claims, or investigating to find out what is true. He's already decided it's true, so he's investigating to achieve what? Validate an already determined conclusion? Does that strike you as independent? Would you trust a cold case detective who said they knew who the perpetrator was and they would be investigating the truth of that guilt?
All right, today I want to talk about some of the complaints I hear, and I hear so many online related to the case for God's existence. Forget about Christianity. If Christianity stands on a prior claim, is there a God? If there is no God, then there is no Christian God.
I agree. This is a good place to start. What cold case methodologies can we use to establish the existence of a God?
So when I first began looking at the case for theism, because I got provoked, and I bought a Bible to see if this guy Jesus was smart, because that's how it started for me. I did not believe in anything supernatural, and I didn't believe there was a God to begin with. So this claim about a Christian God made no sense to me.
It makes no sense to me either.
I had to go back and ask myself, was my presupposition that there's nothing outside of space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry, was it warranted? And I'm going to share with you the template that I used in a book called God's Crime Scene.
Wait. Is this a badly disguised book advert, or is it a reasoned methodology for validating a God? Now, if only I had a book I could plug. Oh, wait a minute, I do. Go buy Apostate, Stories of Deconversion. Link in the show notes. Proceeds go to charity, not my back pocket.
I think I had to read like 117 books, some crazy number of books. And it just took forever. But luckily, in those days, I was traveling so much that I got a lot of these on Kindle, and I did a lot of my research while I was in planes. This is back before you had much help in terms of AI doing research.
Sorry, what? Are you suggesting that you would use AI to do your research now? I've used AI to initiate research on Christian topics, and when I've double-checked what AI comes back with, I've found it to be very variable. There is no substitute for doing the hard legwork. But you also need to vary your content. If all the books that J Warner read in his research were books from apologists, then he barely did 1/3 of the job he should have done.
So I'm just reading books and reading the books on both sides. So like, what's the atheistic explanation for this piece of data? What's the theistic explanation for this piece of data, going back and forth?
No scientific books explaining the data? How it was gathered and what it shows? Only how theists and atheists explain the data. I find going to the source of the data is typically the best place to start. Looking at how other people explain, or explain away, the data only exposes you to their particular biased thinking. I don't use creationist interpretations of scientific data when researching for truthful conclusions. It's a step removed from the source and is prone to twisted and biased reporting.
So in writing this book, there's a ton of research in God's Crime Scene.
There's a ton of life experience in Apostate, Stories of Deconversion. See link in the show notes.
If you think about death investigations, because there are 4 ways to die, right? You can die by either accident, natural, suicide, or murder. And I need to figure out quickly which of these 4 is most reasonable given what's in the room, evidentially. So I ask a simple question, and I try to illustrate that in this book. You'll see there are diagrams, and there's even a story of a case I worked that'll help you understand this. But the idea is, if you can explain every piece of evidence that's in the room by staying in the room, there's a good chance it's not a murder.
Sure, I'll accept that, because I think I know where this is going. I bet he's going to draw an analogy to the universe and God not being inside the universe. Which brings up an obvious question. Is this inside the room observation a standard murder case methodology, or did J Warner invent the idea for this point? Let's do some research. One sec. Yeah. It appears that he is the only person using this framing, which confirms my suspicion that he's using this as an analogy to frame his point. Tread carefully, dear listener. When the points a person makes are unique to them, there might be good reasons for this. That doesn't make them automatically wrong, of course, but it does mean you have a good excuse to be extra careful when fact-checking their claims and conclusions.
So if there's a gun in the room, but it's his gun, and if there's a suicide note in the room and it's his paper, his pen, his handwriting, if there's no indication anyone from outside the room has been in the room with him, it's something other than a murder, but most reasonably. And that's usually where it ends up. On the other hand, if the evidence you see in the room cannot be explained by staying inside the room, if you have to go outside the room to figure out, well, whose gun is this? Like, whose footprints are these? Whose paper is this? This isn't his handwriting. This isn't even his note. Okay, now you're looking for a suspect. You're looking for an intruder. You have to go outside the room to answer the question about what's inside the room.
Makes sense. I agree. And yet, the Major Crime Investigation Manual in Link 2 does not describe this methodology.
Well, that's the whole premise of the book. If you look at the natural universe, you can ask the same question. Can I explain everything that I see in this universe in which we live by staying inside the universe for an explanation?
Called it.
And that would mean that it would have to be explained with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. Something within the realm of naturalism, the natural universe in which we live. To step outside of naturalism is to be looking for a suspect or a causal agent or a causal force that is outside of space, time, and matter, and that causes us to start thinking deeply about whether or not God is the best explanation.
Big set of assumptions made here, which need to be unpacked. I'll be brief. At this present moment, everything that is inside the universe can be explained by remaining inside the universe. Matter, time, physics, etc. only exist as they are inside this universe while it is in its present state. Now, sure, there are questions over how the universe got to be as it is, but that's not the scope of J Warner's analogy. He's talking about inside and outside the room. Not once did he say the room needed explaining, only the evidence inside the room. So I'm going to be very picky in how his analogy is used as stated. His analogy does not extend to the universe itself, and, sadly for him, matter and energy and physics are the universe. The analogy doesn't work once you give it more than a few seconds of critical thought. He needs to do more work to get us thinking outside the universe. He's not yet made a good case to ask the question, might there be a God?
This idea that science explains everything, so therefore there is no need to jump to God, this God of the gaps idea.
Well, science does explain everything that we currently know. Claims that God exists are confined to things that have knowledge gaps.
Or that we don't have a burden. You posit this ridiculous, invisible God. Okay, great. If you say he exists and we have no reason to believe he does, the burden is on you to show that he exists.
That is how it works in every field of science. Those who come up with new ideas need to do the hard work to convince others to take them seriously. Other scientists expect to see papers and results that not only support the idea, but also detail a methodology for replicating those results. Complain about the process all you like. It works.
Or this idea that I can explain all of our experiences, all of our intuitions about moral behavior through just evolution and the evolution of either individuals or cultures or groups.
We can.
And therefore you need no grounding for moral truths outside of those individuals and groups.
I do wish Christians would explain what they mean by grounding. When they talk in terms of grounding moral values, it may sound impressive to other Christians, but it really is pseudo-intellectual Christianese that actually says nothing. There is no point in making this complaint if it is not followed up by a meaningful definition of what it means to ground moral values.
Now, I'll just say one more thing about this. The burden, and people say this all the time, the burden of proof is on you theists. It's not on us atheists.
It's not. If you are unable to convince me that your theistic claims are true, then that's on you. If I can't tell the difference between you telling the truth and you spouting bullshit, then that's a you problem.
So let's address that first. Remember, when you're working a homicide, the question is there a suspect? Does a suspect exist? Especially if you determine it's not going to be a suicide or an accidental or a natural. You're looking for a suspect now. So the question is not does a suspect exist? The question is that particular suspect the best explanation for what I'm seeing in the room? Is that cause the best explanation?
Explanations can be invented that make innocent people appear guilty.
And that means if I posit one cause and you posit another, the burden of proof is on both of us to show that our explanation for the cause of the effect we're seeing, the evidence in the room, is the best explanation.
And if you posit a cause and I say, I'm not convinced, then you need to get more data to change that.
If you suggest that there is a God that created all this, then of course the burden is on you to show why God is the best explanation. But if your explanation is that it's space-time physics, it's space-time matter physics and chemistry, then the burden is on you to show me how you can get these things with just space-time matter physics and chemistry. You have an equal burden because you're trying to explain why your cause makes better sense than mine.
Sure. And there are entire fields of science dedicated to testing those ideas. What tests do you do to validate your God idea?
So I think that burden has to be shared equally. That's just the whole premise before we begin. But now what I want to do is I want to take a look at some lines of evidence.
Great. Let's have some evidence.
I think the evidence we're looking at breaks into 4 categories. And that I think is going to be important later, because if you've got one cause that can explain all 4 categories well and even best, then you're in good footing. The 4 categories of evidence, I describe these in God's Crime Scene, is cosmological evidence. We are in a universe that has a beginning.
Whoa there, not so fast. Wow, right at the first hurdle. The current state of the universe had a beginning. But we don't know that the universe had a beginning. This is a subject of active debate.
And the universe appears to be fine-tuned for life, and that is not controversial, even amongst atheists.
This is standard Christian misdirection. It is not controversial that the universe appears fine-tuned. And there are ways of explaining that appearance. Tacking "for life" at the end of that sentence is where apologists go wrong and step into very dirty water. It is just as valid to say the universe is fine-tuned for black holes, and that life is simply an accidental consequence.
Now, they would say there is no fine-tuner.
Perfectly valid, pending evidence.
But they would not argue with you that there isn't at least the appearance of fine-tuning. They would argue that it could be explained a number of different ways, but the appearance, at least, is not usually controversial.
Why did you forget to tack on the "for life" bit here? See? Classic Christian misdirection, also known as fucking lies.
2, biological evidence that there's life in our universe, then it comes from non-life, and that these biological organisms that eventually emerge also have the appearance of design, and even that, from someone like Richard Dawkins, would at least admit that. That's not controversial.
The thing about evolution is that you would expect to see some examples of apparently brilliant design, in addition to examples of apparently clumsy design that happens to produce the desired result. And we see both. Using one of those to affirm your God while hand-waving away the other one is not how you win the fight for the best explanation.
3, mental evidence. And when I say mental evidence, I mean that there is, like, for example, you and I experience immaterial consciousness. This idea that we think, are we experiencing consciousness? Is this an illusion?
Yes.
And this has got to emerge from unconscious matter. How does that happen?
Great question. And you don't magically solve it by saying, hey presto, I've got a God that does magic permanently all the time, every day to do this?
And two, we have free agents because we are not bound by our physical brains.
Well, actually we are.
Now, you seem to experience free agency, which makes sense if you have a mind that is not.
We appear to experience free agency because the vast majority of decision-making work our brain does for us is unconscious.
Fourth category, moral evidence, that we seem to acknowledge, and we have historically acknowledged certain transcendent, objective moral truths. The question is, how do we ground them? From where do they come?
There's that grounding word again. Notice how the claim of transcendent, objective moral truths is assumed. As social creatures, there are certain things we would not like to experience. And because of that, we recognize that others also would not like to experience them. So it is not a surprise that in a world of possible harms, there is unanimous agreement that these harms are bad, undesired, not wanted. There is nothing magical about that. It does not need any God to explain it.
This is the whole premise of God's crime scene. 4 categories of evidence, trying to figure out which is the best explanation. Is the best explanation in the room, space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry, or is the best explanation a being outside the room? Okay, great. All that being said, let's jump right into one of the more common things you're going to hear. This idea that naturalistic explanations can explain it all. Science has already discovered these explanations explain it all. And I want to talk, first of all, about the origin of the universe. This idea that we don't need God because we can somehow, through explaining in some way the origin of the universe, as if it's not a complete scientific mystery to people.
Now, why would I think that J Warner Wallace, retired detective, would be able to explain the origin of the universe any better than somebody or multiple people whose literal job it is to investigate it to the best of their abilities?
I use an analogy in the book that talks about a particular piece of evidence we had at a crime scene, and you have to read the book in order to see what I'm talking about. But it really kind of breaks down into 3 categories, 3 questions we have to ask when we examine any singular piece of evidence at a crime scene or even here. The first question is, how long has this item been at the scene? Is this something that was there before the crime even occurred? If so, it's probably not event, but unless it got moved for some reason. But if it's just been stationary in the scene and has been there for 2 years and now somebody comes in, well, at least we know it's not evidence of the intruder. So the first question is, how long has that? And this is a question of origination. How long has it been there? What's the origin for it? So origination, how long it's been there, is the first question. Second, well, who caused it to appear in the scene if it wasn't there all along, if it wasn't there before the crime? The question is, who brought it in? Causation. Causation is the second question. Third question. Okay, so what does this tell us about? Is there something about the nature of the evidence itself that tells us about the nature of the cause, the suspect?
On the face of it, in the context of a crime scene, these seem perfectly reasonable. Let's see how he tries to shoehorn those into the universe.
So I want to look at some good evidence that I think demonstrates that we are in a universe that has a beginning. So many times online, I will see people push back and say, no, the universe is somehow infinitely old. There is no reason to have to explain a universe with a beginning. I can certainly understand why they would want to take that approach because, as you know, anything that has a beginning must have a beginner. This is the law of causality.
And using language like beginner means that you are already pointing to a predetermined conclusion before you've actually assessed the evidence.
So if the universe has a beginning...
We don't know that.
That means something caused it to begin. But there, of course, becomes the problem because the standard cosmological model for the beginning of the universe is that all space, time, and matter has a beginning.
And there is a very real problem here because beginning is a temporal word, but time began at the start of this phase of the universe. So you can't really talk about a before when there was no before to have a before of. Get it?
Even though a lot of your internet atheists...
Aren't they just the worst?
A lot of people who are making videos online will deny this. The reality of it is that is still the standard cosmological model, Big Bang cosmology. It is still at the core of what most astrophysicists and cosmologists think.
Science has moved on, Jay. time for you to catch up.
And this idea means that there was nothing before space-time and matter. True nothingness.
Nope. Wrong. Nobody says that. Literally, nobody. Nobody's in this field says that. Catch up with the science, dude.
We are in a universe that has a beginning. You know right away we've got a problem, don't we? From a naturalistic perspective. What is nature, space-time, and matter?
Basically, this boils down to he can't imagine how it might happen naturally, therefore there must be a God. All this is evidence for is that the start of the universe, if that's really a phrase that you're allowed to say, is problematic. We're still trying to work it out. There is lots of knowledge we don't have. But none of what he said is actual evidence for a God. For evidence for a God, you need some kind of test and detection that results in, oh, look, a God. Pointing at a gap in knowledge, something that's hard to explain, does not mean, under any version, that there is a God.
That means the cause has to be outside of space, time, and matter, which means by definition it is extra-natural.
Also known as defining God into existence, which is bullshit. That's pseudo-intellectualism. It does not work. It is not evidence.
And Alexander Friedmann, when he developed his mathematical model, right, which predicted the expanding universe we now observe.
Also known as the Friedmann equations. See the link at 7.
And Lemaitre also proposed that a disciple, Monsignor, just posited the same thing. He proposed an expanding universe. But here's the problem. If we really are in an expanding universe, the way that Friedmann's model predicted, and the way that George Lemaitre also proposed, and we're actually seeing this, what is it expanding from?
A smaller version of itself.
If we run the expansion backwards, like a balloon that's blowing up, if we run it backwards, we have to have a point from which everything begins to expand.
That's right. This is a point at which the universe, as we currently see it, started expanding. This is typically referred to as the Big Bang. Key point to note here. This is a moment of sudden expansion. It is not a point of creation.
That would start you thinking that we are in a universe that has a beginning. And then, of course, we have now observational evidence.
It's a mistake to conflate the start of expansion with the start of the actual universe.
That supports that. We have redshift evidence. If a distant object, right, is moving toward Earth, if you observe it through the spectrograph of colors, you'll see it shift toward blue. If it's moving away from us, it shifts toward red. And we now see that red shift.
We do. It is evidence of expansion. We are in an expanding universe. This is not controversial, and also, critically, it does not indicate a God.
Even the cosmic background radiation, right? That's the kind of residual evidence of that cosmic expansion. And that's been tested. I wrote all about the history of the cosmic background radiation and how it was discovered. It's kind of an interesting story. You can see that in God's Crime Scene. But the whole point is we have this pervasive radiation that is pretty evenly spread throughout the universe, which is consistent with an origin event.
Yes, the Big Bang, which is the origin of the expanding universe. Not a creation event, an expansion event.
The idea here is when you have several lines of evidence that point to the same inference, you have good reason to believe that's probably a good inference. And so that's why, there's a lot, the quantity of evidence here, the diversity of this evidence here, I think it's reasonable to infer that the universe had a beginning, and it's not infinitely old.
No. This is slippery apologetics. All that has been done here is confirm that the existing material within the universe started expanding. This is good science. What isn't good science is expanding from that, see what I did there, into the claim that this is a creation event, and it is even less safe to say that a God was responsible for that. Those two assumptions need far more evidence than what Mr. Wallace has presented.
And that means you've got to explain what could cause the evidence that's outside of space, time, and matter.
How do you detect evidence that is outside of space, time, and matter?
And if you're going to say, well, I don't know what could explain that from a purely naturalistic perspective, but I know that someday we'll figure it out. Well, that is called science of the gaps.
Wow. Did he really just say that? Jesus. First, while we do not yet know what might have initiated the Big Bang, there are very clever minds actively working on it. See the links already referenced for good starting points. I do hope that one day we will figure it out. And if that figuring out results in actual positive detectable evidence for a god, then that'll change a whole lot of conversations. To criticise that as science of the gaps is beyond dumb, because science is a process, not a statement of belief. The scientific community is trying to find that answer. Let's support and celebrate those people. Lazy apologists like J Warner would rather insert their God idea into the existing knowledge gap. They are the ones who should be criticised.
That is no better than you. They're not going to allow us to say, we can't explain it, therefore God. But to say we can't explain it, and they are nowhere near close to explaining it, therefore science will explain it, is exactly the same principle in reverse.
Bullshit, for the reasons that I just gave. But I do like how Jay is now pitting science answers as incompatible with his God idea. I don't think he intended to do this, but it's telling that he let it slip. It's as though he wants the scientists to give up trying so that he can continue with his God delusion.
So I think the best inference is that something outside of space, time, and matter is the cause.
How do you measure and detect that, Jay? Because if you can't be sure.
And even like people like Paolo Saraceno. Now, this is a guy who is still a pretty well credentialed physicist. He's the director of the National Council of Research, and he's also the director of the National Institute of Astronomy and Astrophysics.
See link at 8 if you want to get a head start on investigating and fact-checking this individual.
His statement on this topic is pretty telling. The discovery, quote, the discovery of background radiation together with the observed abundance of helium was a mortal blow to the theory of a stationary universe. Only an initial fireball could have produced it. This meant the universe had an origin, unquote.
Cherry-picking quotes from other people who say what you want to be said isn't evidence that what you're actually saying is true. You need actual evidence.
Look, once you discover that the universe is not infinitely old, that it has a beginning.
Except you haven't.
I think it's reasonable to attribute the appearance of that universe with a beginning, the room in essence, to some non-spatial, atemporal, and non-material cause.
This is question-begging bullshit. He's got his already defined conclusion. His preferred God exists, and now he's twisting the interpretation of what we actually know to fit his preferred conclusion.
What I mean is, we just know this much so far. The cause has to be outside of space, time, and matter.
You can't know that.
And it can have itself no physical substance. So there's the problem. And at least you're starting to bite the apple that is called theism.
An apple that exists purely and entirely within the realm of no knowledge.
And anything that has a beginning has a beginner. Anything that is caused has a causer.
Great. Then you'll be submitting grants to do experiments to identify that causer. What do you mean you expect me to just take people's word for it? Fuck off. If it's so important, you'll make the effort to test it. And if you can't do that, then I can't take you seriously.
And there's the problem. So this idea that the science can explain everything and so therefore there's no need for God. Well, this is one of those things that science really can't explain yet.
You just said yet. Does that mean you think science will be able to explain it? It's possible science won't. Which means we don't know. Which means if we don't know, putting your God into it is intellectually lazy and morally bankrupt, frankly.
Let's take another example of the kinds of things you're going to see online. This idea that somehow the fine-tuning we see in the universe is either just luck or fortunate. We happen to be in a universe we can observe, so therefore it must be the kind of universe in which we could appear. So it's not really, it shouldn't be a mystery to us that we happen to be in a universe that's designed for our life, although we wouldn't be here to observe it if it wasn't true.
A universe that allows for life to evolve and procreate is a universe that will contain life that is ideally suited to the conditions that universe provides because of aforementioned evolution. So hey presto, we're suited to this universe. Hallelujah, a miracle. No, evolution.
So get over it. It's not that special.
My thoughts entirely.
Or maybe there's a series of multiverses. We just happen to be the lucky one. Or somehow we could have evolved to fit in this universe as it is. Look, lots of people who will say that whatever the fine tuning you Christians think is out there, well, that fine tuning is an illusion, or it can be explained some other way. And I use as an example in the book. Again, I hope you'll at least take a look at it and see if it helps you rethink these. I had a crime scene that was absolutely tampered with in an effort to make something look like an accident, but in fact, it wasn't accidental at all. It was tampered with in such a way that this man caused the death of this woman. And how you look at it is you look at the layers of evidence. Again, you're making a cumulative case, and we started collecting evidence from what I call three different categories: foundational evidence, the evidence from right around the house, like what's the backstory? That's the foundational evidence between these two people. What is the evidence that's right around the property? Because he tinkered with a lot of the property to make this work. And then finally, what did he do in that actual room inside the house that made it happen this way?
Great. You look at actual evidence to see if you can work out not only what happened, but also who did the things that happened and how the who did the things that happened. Very specific, testable, repeatable tests to determine the events that occurred.
This is surely an accident, the way this happened. And we had to show that no, actually, the crime scenes, the concentric rings have been tampered with. Well, we have the same kind of thing. You could look at the foundational laws of physics that govern the universe. You could look at the kind of, I would call the regional properties of just our solar system. And then you can even drill down into the properties of our planet. So you can see these concentric rings of evidence. And I think if you did that, you would see
that they are all explained using the natural laws of physics.
That there is some fine tuning here, which is very unusual.
How do you know it's unusual? What other universes do you have access to so that you can do a comparison? Oh, you don't know it's unusual. You're just saying it and hoping that nobody will check. Yeah, fucking lazy apologists.
The conditions that we see, all the cosmological constants in those three areas of foundational laws of physics, the regional properties of our solar system, and the locational properties of our planet, that those three sets of conditions had to be just so for the outcome to be life like we know it, carbon-based life like we see it.
Yeah. And first you need to establish whether or not those values that you are so precious about could actually be any different. And we don't know that. We do not know that they could have been any different. There's also interrelationality between all of these values as well. And also, if they had been a tiny difference, no, we would not exist, but something else would. Because the universe would now become perfect, fine-tuned if you like, for that and not for us. This is not an argument for a God. This is just an argument for the happenstance of the universe becoming the way it is.
Even Paul Davies will stipulate to this. He'll say that everyone agrees that the universe looks as though it was designed for life. Doesn't mean it is, but it certainly looks that way.
Looks can be deceiving.
Now, what are we talking about in terms of the level of fine-tuning? Like lots of people have tried to kind of figure out a series of examples or illustrations or metaphors to kind of show you precisely how fine-tuned the universe is. I've collected a bunch of these. I'll give you the ones I think are the most helpful. This is how I wrote about them in God's Crime Scene. Like, for example, the constants in all the proportions of the strong nuclear force. Now we're talking about that first foundational aspect of our universe, the universe we live in. Well, it turns out that the constants in all the proportions of both the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic force, and the force of gravity, those four, must be within this incredibly narrow range. And the ratio of electrons to protons has got to be precariously balanced in order for anything else in the universe to be stable. And if the value of that ratio Just that ratio of electrons to protons was deviated more than 1 in 10 to the 37th. The universe as we know it would not exist.
Oh no, the universe would be different. Oh, how terrible. Really, seriously. What is the point of this? Why is this allegedly so significant?
Now, this is really hard to understand what 10 to the 37th is, okay?
I'm going to skip his demonstration of how big a number this is because, yeah, it's a really big number, an impressively big number, but big numbers do not prove God. All it shows is a lack of understanding of what the scientists are saying about fine-tuning. See the video I've already put in the show notes.
You'll see I've offered several more of these analogies in God's crime scene, but I just want you to get your head around the idea that the amount of this is why people who are not necessarily on the theistic side of this they think it's remarkable that we could even live in a universe that has this kind of fine-tuning. As a matter of fact, Mikio Kaku says it this way: it's shocking to find how many of the familiar constants of the universe lie within a very narrow band that makes life possible.
And yet, he's not a Christian. He's not a believer in J's God. Stop it with the convenient quotes that happen to coincide with something that you want to say. Evidence, please.
We have to have a certain kind of galaxy with spiral arms to be a certain way. The gravitational forces have to be just so. Have to have a certain form of solar system.
This is stretching it somewhat. But there is a point to respond to here. Our galaxy is average. Our solar system is average. And yet out of all the millions of other galaxies and billions of other solar systems, ours is the only one we know of that has life. Every single other solar system that's been detected appears to have planets that are not compatible with life as we know it. So, in that sense, we're in a special place. Now, if you run the numbers for how many possible configurations there are out there, it becomes inevitable that at least one solar system would end up being life-supporting. So it really is not a stretch to discover that the universe has one. It's rather arrogant for the life on that lucky planet to then declare that the universe was created for it to exist.
So here we have an infinite number of universes.
I'm going to skip straight past the bit where he talks about multiverses because it's garbled and incoherent, and I really can't be bothered to go through the effort of breaking it down into some chunks that I can respond to. So just accept that he talks about multiverses. It is utter junk, just like the rest of this podcast, and it's so junky, I simply can't be bothered to respond to it.
I think the true and honest answer on the part of atheists, scientists, would have to be, well, we just don't know yet.
And guess what? That's exactly what they do say. There are lots of ideas out there. Multiverses is one of them, but lots of other ideas. There's lots of ideas for how our universe came to be the way it is. Lots of ideas there. People are arguing and discussing lots of different options and working out ways to separate the most likely ones from the least likely ones so that they can get to something that approximates the truth. What they don't do is just make up shit like, oh look, there's a super magical god that did it all for us. Bing, there it is. But it's all right, you can't detect it. You just have to take my word for it, bro. That's not what they do. They're trying to work it out.
But there they go again. We just don't know yet. Therefore, we trust that there's no God. There's no God needed.
Because nothing that has so far been discovered to be knowable and actual knowledge requires a God. It's all explained naturally. Now, if only apologists were to take the same kind of honesty and integrity and say, you know what, we don't know, but we're going to make up shit anyway. If they could be honest, they might get more respect.
If there is a God, it would make sense that he would be the one thing outside of space, time, and matter that would have the power to design something.
Sure, but I'm not going to believe that such a thing exists until I can see a way of accurately and reliably testing for the existence of that God. And on the topic of design, let's see something that's actually designed, please.
Well, if it is designed, why is it that there's so much waste? You need this much to get this one little spot of life?
Not a line of argumentation that I typically use. let's go with it. Let's see where he takes us.
Have you ever created anything? I don't know about you, but I've created stuff. The amount of waste that goes into creating the one little thing that's good.
When humans do it, yes, but we're supposedly talking about a perfect being that can literally create out of nothing. Why would that being require any waste? Unless you're trying to convince me that the God that you worship is actually incompetent and imperfect.
The more complicated the design, the more waste typically goes into creating it.
Even for God. Wow.
Let's talk about another complaint I hear. This idea that we are just evolved creatures who have brains.
We are.
And have created moral behaviors that are either just a result of our brain chemistry, our behavioral history.
We are.
The appearance of our consciousness, the appearance of our free agency, the existence of our free agency can all be explained through evolutionary processes.
It is, although our agency is technically not free, but we may get to that.
If we have any good evidence that we can get from inanimate, non-living matter to life through simply physics.
If God was so evidential, it would be simpler to give that evidence. But no, apologists aim for the hard parts of science and squeeze their God into any perceived knowledge gap. This is why the idea of a conflict between religion and science exists. To answer the question of life from non-life, see the links at 9. And while you're reading those, here is a fun thought experiment to try. Question 1. Are you alive? I think yes is a reasonable answer. Now imagine a gigantic table and each atom on your body is laid out on that table in such a way that none touches the other. Question 2. Which of those atoms is alive? All of them? Just one? None? I think none is the right answer. And yet, when they're all interconnected in a specific way, we have a live human. Life from non-life. What we call life emerges from the functioning of what makes up the body. And this is why life is hard to define. See the link at 10 for a discussion on the question of, are viruses alive?
No one's any closer today than they were 70 years ago at explaining the origin. And the more we discover about the origin of life, the nature, the complexity of life.
But we are closer. We have learnt more because, as your own words just said, the more we discover, we are progressing. It's not easy. No one's pretending it's easy. We are progressing bit by bit and learning more as each year passes.
Antony Flew, the famous atheist, who in his 80s eventually said he has at least died a theist. Was he a Christian? No. But he was a theist because he could not. To him, it was all in the DNA. He could hold on to his atheism and actually be the foundation, one of the thinking founders of atheism in the 20th century, upon whom a lot of other atheists grounded their disbelief. Then Antony Flew flips at the end because, no, he's not getting old and senile. He discovered the problems with DNA. Information requires a writer. It requires a mind. It requires an author.
A classic case of not being able to accept that there are things we don't currently know, and then inserting a deity into that knowledge gap. And Professor Wallace is doing exactly that when he claims DNA requires a writer.
I talk about this in God's Crime Scene in terms of the levels of information theory and how you can get just the first level of information, the crudest level of information with physics. But once you get to level 2, you are already outside the room of what space, time, matter, and physics and chemistry can get you.
See the link at 11 for more information about DNA and how it came to be from RNA. This is literally J Warner Wallace inventing his own definition of the scientific process.
Just type in my name on YouTube with DNA, and you'll see several that are where I talk about this problem with DNA.
Because an average quality crime scene detective is clearly so much better at explaining DNA than the actual scientists that study it for decades. Fucking hell.
Like, how do we go from material beings to an immaterial mind?
Well, first you need to define what you mean by immaterial mind, what it is, and how one actually exists. Because from everything that we know, there is no such thing as a mind without a physical brain.
Yet the one thing you think you're most aware of is your own mental thoughts and your freedom to think those thoughts.
Things you can only do because you have a physical brain.
So here we are again, trying to explain that what we see in life, what we see around us, the information in DNA, our consciousness, our free agency, and we're trying to explain it either inside the room with space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry, and there's no explanation. So we say, what, therefore, someday we will be able to explain it?
Maybe. The best we've got right now is our investigations into these topics are incomplete. They are still ongoing, and we do not yet know everything that we are going to know. We might be able to explain it, we might not, but we won't know until we've done everything we can possibly do to investigate those things. Our lack of knowledge now is not positive evidence for a God. In order to promote your God, find actual evidence for your God. Christ.
Or is the better explanation that you were created by a mind, a being that has a mind and creates you in its image?
For that explanation to work, you need a valid way of being able to test it. But you don't. All you've got is the claim based on lack of knowledge elsewhere. That is not a good place to start.
And I think there is an objective standard of righteousness by which we measure something and call it evil.
Great. Give us the details on how you access it and how we tell the difference between those standards and those that we prefer ourselves.
But the only question is, why would such a God, if he's good at all, allow you to suffer the way you do?
Because he's a monumental sadistic dick.
Well, I'm not going to go through all of these, but in the book, God's Crime Scene, I offer a cumulative case for why God might allow us to suffer. And it's like anything else in life. We'd love to have the silver bullet, or we'd love to have the one explanation that ends the argument. But life isn't this way. It's a constellation of arguments, or a constellation of ideas, or a constellation of claims and explanations that explains any one thing. And that's the same here when it comes to evil in the world. If there's a good God, he's going to create a world in which the best, highest good value, loving value, is going to emerge. Love.
Honestly, I look around the world today and I see all the things that Christians are involved in, and I'm not seeing a lot of love. Seeing a lot more love from the woke atheist left, not so much from the hard Christian right. Just saying.
A good God is going to create a world in which people can love. But that's a dangerous world that's going to be filled with evil. Why? Because it requires free agency. You require the freedom, or love is just a platitude.
Quick question here. Feel free to chip in, any people who might have an opinion on this question. Will there be free will in heaven? Will there be sin and evil in heaven?
Our life is meant to be eternal. And you have to measure any aspect of suffering in terms of not the 90 years you could have had suffering free, but the eternal number of years, the infinite number of years that you will live in which you can experience bliss in heaven.
Like I said, monumental, sadistic dick.
Compassion is a response to hardship. Charity is a response to poverty. In other words, if you want these high values to emerge in your children, you're going to have to expose them to the hardships that allow them to make choices about how they respond.
Frankly, I would actually rather live in a world where there was no hardship so that nobody needed charity.
So I think there's like 6 or 7 of these that I think you could look at. I've written about them in more length in God's Crime Scene. But let's just wrap this up.
Yes, let's do, because honestly, I'm bored of all this. If you've got this far, well done.
But in that last piece, I would just say this. If you're using words, if you hear people who are using words in their social media posts, like, oh, this is evil, or God is evil, or he's unjust, he's a horrendous, horrific God. Well, just remember, you're borrowing language that is only available to you if there is a standard of righteousness that makes sense of that language.
Not true. I can have opinions. Let's use a sports example, given that the time I'm recording this, the Football World Cup is going on. It is possible for someone to say, subjectively, I think England is the greatest football team. It's possible to say that from a subjective perspective because that is their opinion from their perspective and their desires. And the same is true about moral values. God is a dick from my perspective, and that is my judgment subjectively from my opinion on these things.
If all injustice is simply a matter of what you think is unjust, well, then change your mind. You'll get rid of all injustice.
Is that how Christians do it then?
You can't do it that way because it transcends your mind. Oh, it does? And now you're borrowing from my worldview.
No, we recognize harm when we observe it. We do not need an objective master telling us what to like and what not to like. If I see a child hurting, I recognize that they don't enjoy it because, hey, surprise, I wouldn't like it done to myself. That is how it works.
All right, so the whole point I'm trying to make is if you, and this is what I tried to do at the very end of God's crime scene, is if you were to look at the evidence in any crime scene, you can reconstruct a suspect profile typically from what you see in the crime scene. You can say, well, this person must have this size shoe, he's this blood type, he's like, all this evidence comes together. You can actually get a pretty decent picture of what you're looking for. The same thing is true here. If you look at we've got a universe that has a beginning and appears to be fine-tuned, and life emerges from non-life, and it looks like it's designed when it finally gets here, and you've got consciousness, and you've got a mind, and you've got free agency, and we see there's objective standards of evil, and standards of moral claims, objective moral truths, and there is a standard of evil.
All things that have been claimed to exist without actual evidence. They've just been stated as though they're facts, and we're expected to accept them. And then based on the acceptance of those facts, Jay is making a case for his God. But the trouble is, he hasn't actually established these facts. He's assumed them. His whole room analogy falls apart because he's made one enormous assumption and absolutely failed to back it up.
The best I could say as a non-believer, the best I could say as an atheist is, we don't have an answer for those yet.
And that's true. It might be the truth. It might be the truth for a very long time. The best we've got is we're trying hard, we've got some answers, but we don't have everything and we can't explain everything. If you're pointing to that lack, that knowledge gap to explain a God, you are doing God gap theology. You're a gapateist. That's it. And I laugh at you if that's what you're doing. Pillock.
There is no way for us to answer those questions yet. Well, there is a way to answer them. If you will move from naturalism, there's actually a pretty satisfying answer if you at least hold with an open hand a supernatural perspective, an extra-natural perspective. It's just that you refuse to do that, so therefore...
Show us the evidence!
It's like, not yet. I'm committed, though. It's going to be space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry, but nothing really satisfies yet. Well, you're going to die in that situation. Why would you not at least consider that there's something out there, and a divine intruder?
Detail how I can access it then.
And I don't care what you see on TikTok or on any of these social media platforms, the best explanations for those pieces of evidence are still God.
They're only evidence for a God if they're real in the way that you say they are, Jay. But they're not. We can explain a lot of them very sufficiently, naturally. Your failure to appreciate that, your failure to understand that is your problem, not our problem. So we do have an evidence problem, but it's not the way Jay thinks it is. And with that said, thank you for getting this far. I've almost made it to the hour. Never mind. Until next time, please be You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.